It's another day in America. Another day in America. Welcome to the America at 250 podcast, devoted to enabling us to see and feel America through the eyes and hearts of others, and as a result, take concrete steps to make America truly great. I'm Kevin Caldwell. And in order to pursue the purpose of this podcast, throughout the project, I'll be inviting a very diverse set of guests to share how they would answer what would make America great. It only seems fitting during this year in which America turns 250. Unanswered questions, 250 years and counting, we're still waiting in America. In June of 2025, I was in South Korea, where I was speaking at a conference devoted to something I call mutualism, by which I mean an approach to all forms of human engagement, an approach grounded in the posture of welcoming our differences, receiving from one another, giving to one another, learning from one another, even correcting one another, an approach that applies really to every facet of life. My roommate was a Palestinian Muslim from the West Bank, and during our time together, there were two experiences that became the seeds of what eventually grew and blossomed into this podcast series. First, he and I visited an exhibition of the work of the artist Marc Chagall. Several rooms of that collection were devoted to his depictions of the treatment of the Jewish people under the Nazis. My friend left the exhibit in tears. And when I asked him what was going on, he said, "We're the same." And he explained that during the exhibition, he realized there was a shared experience of suffering, through which he had a renewed awareness of a shared humanity. He felt the way that all humans are profoundly interconnected, not just as a theory, but as a reality. The exhibit had shown him the experiences and realities of others in ways he had not seen so clearly before, and as a result, he was overcome by empathy and compassion. He'd been enabled to see things from inside the eyes and hearts of others. And that's become one of the inspirations for this podcast series, to enable us to see and feel through the eyes and hearts of others and experience empathy and compassion. Second, during our time together, my friend and I watched the news of events that were unfolding in Los Angeles, California. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, were conducting targeted raids, showing up at local businesses, garment factories, and street vendor locations, leading to dozens of arrests. And of course, at that time, we could not have known that this was just the crack in the dam that was going to lead to a flood and eventually to the killing of dozens of people, including U.S. citizens, in the streets and in detention centers around our country. The ICE operations in L.A. almost immediately sparked growing protests, and in response, the president ordered the deployment of thousands of members of the National Guard and sent active duty Marines to nearby staging areas, resulting in a state of emergency, in temporary curfews, widespread political friction, and pushback from the mayor of Los Angeles and the governor of California. That experience is also one of the inspirations for this podcast series, for I believe that loyalty to our country requires us to speak and act when we see things taking place that are not in keeping with what our country says it stands for. Those two experiences, the experience at the museum, the experience of watching the news of Los Angeles with my friend, ripened over time into what has become this podcast. In the course of the various episodes, we're going to look honestly at our history from inside the eyes and hearts of other people, shedding light on ways that our shared history is misaligned with the values that we claim, with the hope that I have that we might experience a deep sense of empathy and compassion, and that could result in action. This kind of empathy and compassion, combined with concrete actions, will, I believe, make America great. Now, as I'm speaking, it's been a year since those June 2025 experiences with my friend in South Korea. And now July 4th, 2026 is coming, 250 years since July 4th, 1776. And I know many in America are going to be gearing up for special celebrations of this country's history. Flags will fly, speeches will be given, events will be organized. In fact, it's already begun, of course. For example, May 17th saw a number of religious and political and media figures take part in an event called Rededicate America 250. There was also an alternative halftime show for this year's Super Bowl, which blended religious and patriotic themes spiced with anti-woke rhetoric. I've noticed that even commercials, especially recently, especially car commercials, are themed with a sort of muscular white male, red, white, and blue patriotism as a branding effort. I've found myself, with increasing frequency as I see all this, asking, I wonder how that feels. I wonder how it feels to see all that for the descendants of the First Nations of this land, for descendants of enslaved peoples, for descendants of the Japanese who were interred in World War II, for descendants of those who lived in what's now southwestern United States when that territory was ruled by Spain, and then Mexico, and then the federal government of the United States. I wonder what it's like for Asian men and women who have diverse and varied experiences of America, both before and after coming here, including those born here. For women who have had to claw and fight for the right to vote, and for whom the Equal Rights Amendment has yet to be approved and ratified. For Muslims and Hindus and Sikhs and adherents of other faiths, as Christian nationalism becomes more and more frequently proclaimed in pulpits and also articulated explicitly as an aim by key government leaders. For all those whose sexuality and gender does not match the binary definitions of a very powerful and vocal majority. What does it feel like to see all that? What does it feel like to hear the slogan, "Make America Great Again," and see it on signs and hats and shirts? In June of 2015, Donald Trump announced his first presidential campaign and trademarked that phrase, "Make America Great Again," as his official slogan, shortened usually simply to MAGA. But which America and whose America? Which era of our history does MAGA want to bring back again? Now, the slogan itself is actually not entirely original with Trump. It was first used by Ronald Reagan in 1980. Bill Clinton often featured that phrase or variations of it in 1991 and 1992. However, the most recent iteration of the idea of making America great has become more than a campaign slogan. MAGA's become a movement. And while that movement does not specify which era we should return to, in the rhetoric of MAGA leaders and supporters, there are some very clear indicators of what has caused America's fall for greatness. And those might hint at what the solution might be. Some of those indicators of what's caused our fall are things like foreign influence and immigration and multiculturalism, DEI, Muslims, trans people, and so on. That's just a partial list. And as a result, the solutions for making America great seem to include things such as America First policies, economic protectionism, drastic reductions of immigration. For example, back in 2015, Trump called for a total, complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States. The removal of historical references to slavery from official publications and websites, taking women off of websites, attempts to shut down and actively punish voices that express criticism, the proposed elimination or reduction of public programs that involve health care and Social Security, threats to sue or imprison present or former political rivals. The list goes on and on. When one steps back and looks for themes in all of this, it's hard to escape the feeling that what is meant by making America great again is making it a place that is particularly great if one is a white male. and particularly a white, straight, cisgender male. I think the question of what can make America great is actually a vital, crucial, and urgent question. But what is it that might truly make America great? Not again, but truly great. What's it going to require, and how might we go about it? My hope for fostering empathy and compassion is grounded in the fact that I believe that the ability to see things through the eyes and experiences and hearts of others gives birth to empathy and compassion. And empathy and compassion, in turn, can inspire and energize action. Actions inspired by empathy and compassion, engendered by seeing and feeling America through the eyes and hearts of others. That can make us great. In fact, if that becomes real enough for all of us, not only can it make us great, it will. But how? My Palestinian friend and I visited an art exhibition, and we watched the news. And in a small way, those events forced us to see and to face things. And those experiences enabled us to see things through the eyes and hearts of others. Well, instead of visiting a museum like my friend and I, in the various podcast episodes, we're going to be visiting with and listening to real people, seeking to experience America through their eyes and hearts. I'm going to be welcoming guests who can, each in their unique ways, represent some of the diversity of the United States. First Nations, descendants of slaves, descendants of immigrants from Mexico and China and Pakistan, men and women, cisgender and LGBTQ+. Now, when I say represent, I'm under no illusion, and neither are they, that they somehow speak for all people in their quote-unquote designated segment of the population. But by hearing specific, real, particular, individual stories and experiences, we are able, I believe, in a more universal way to relate, to experience, and to feel, again, empathy and compassion. But I can imagine an objection here, quote unquote. That seems like a selective list, Kevin. Other than yourself, there's no white males. Let me offer 4 comments as a response. And first, to be very clear, I'm not developing this project with the purpose of making white men feel bad. That's not the reason for not including those voices. As I've said, my aim is to invite us to see and feel through the eyes and hearts of my guests, and thus to engender empathy and compassion. Second, my approach and my guest list might change as the podcast and project emerges and develops. I don't have it all mapped out yet. And third, I'm also very aware of the reality of what we might call performative virtue signaling. And it's a real temptation for white men in our current climate. I'm not suggesting that every potential white male guest would exhibit that, but I decided to limit the risk. Of course, here I am, a white male, also running the risk of slipping into performative virtue signaling. And yeah, that's a real thing. And it's in me too. All I can do is to do my best to exercise self-awareness and seek to smash the head of that ugly thing whenever I sense it trying to show itself, which it may well attempt to do. But fourth, and this is really the most important point at this stage, I have absolutely no doubt that there will be plenty of opportunity for white male voices during the various celebrations of America's 250th anniversary. This is a space in which my aim is to use whatever tiny platform I possess in order to give others a voice. And as we do so, my hope is that we will listen to stories, their stories, as well as their ideas about what might make America truly and deeply great, whether my listeners agree or not. My hope is that as we listen, we'll experience the sort of empathy and compassion that can enable us to deepen our profound interconnection with one another, not just theoretically, but experientially. That would, as I see it, already be a sign of greatness. But again, I also hope that in some small way, this podcast can inspire action, specific, concrete actions. Ideas of what those actions might be will, of course, surface as the episodes unfold. But as an overarching theme, I would suggest that the work ahead of us is the work of making real the still as yet unrealized ideals of the Declaration of Independence. And I say unrealized ideals for two reasons. I say unrealized because the aspirations of the Declaration have never been fully implemented. I think that's obvious to anyone listening. And I say ideals because even at the time of the writing of the Declaration, there were fault lines in it and in its framers. The ideal, for example, that all men are created equal was riddled with at least 4 major fault lines. To state the most obvious, the signatories were, of course, all white and all men, and some might suggest, well, yes, of course, it was a document of its time. And that point's not without merit, but the 4 fault lines I'm talking about are discovered as we dig a little further. So first, there were 56 delegates who signed the document in 1776. 41 of them were enslavers. And upon signing the Declaration, they did not free their enslaved, quote-unquote, property. That's a fault line. Many who signed the Declaration profited directly from acquiring the lands of the original inhabitants. And even more telling, listen to how the Declaration describes First Nations people. In listing the grievances against King George, the final complaint against the king reads that the king, quote unquote, has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers, notice that, the merciless Indian savages whose known rule of warfare is undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. All men created equal? There's another fault line here. Here's another one. The Declaration created a republic that excluded women, a republic exclusively for men. There's no other way to read the document. In keeping with the laws of Great Britain at the time, married women were stripped of their legal identities upon marriage, could not vote, could not own land, could not sign contracts. Yet another fault line. The signers of the Declaration were predominantly wealthy. This one is easy to miss. Most of them were property owners. While the Declaration itself doesn't restrict overtly or explicitly rights of political involvement to non-wealthy or non-propertied men, the signers actually did widely believe that only property owners really had a stake in society. And in fact, many states initially, in fact, restricted voting to white men who owned land or who paid certain kinds of taxes levied on those more wealthy. So 4 major fault lines: slavery, First Nations, women, and class. This is why I said earlier that as an overarching theme, I suggest that the work ahead of us is the work of making real the as yet unrealized ideals of the Declaration of Independence, the work of addressing these fault lines. For they're still with us. They may be masked in different ways and expressed in different ways, but they're real. The work ahead of us is the work required in order to become fully, completely, and for all people, a country that holds, quote, these truths to be self-evident. In order to fully become a society in which, for all of us, regardless of race, color, language, religion, gender, country of origin, we not only say, but indeed we build as if we believe that all are created equal, endowed with certain unalienable rights. An unalienable right is a right you cannot make alien to a person. And those rights are, of course, as you know, to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Experiencing the deep interconnection we all share as humans, as that is flavored and scented with empathy and compassion for one another, paired with concrete actions to repair the sources and examples of our disconnection, that will make the Declaration at long last fully and truly a reality. And that, I posit, would make America great. So I look forward to the future episodes when we'll be inviting guests, and I hope that you'll join me and accept the invitation to see and experience America through the eyes and hearts of others. See you next time. Maybe someday in America, another day in America, maybe someday in